Good morning, crime community. I'm here to finish reading about Elizabeth Barrett Browning. But now even this isn't quite enough to manage her symptoms, though her imagination is certainly undimmed as she writes in August Voice and Tale of Villafranca and Where's Agnes, a grief-stuck debunking of spiritualism. Here, as she has been before she approaches autobiographical material slant through fiction, the poem's narrator has lost a dear friend, Agnes, who cannot come back because of the dead, because she's too good to have any truck with things hellish. Her ghostly manifestation must therefore be a fake, which means that Agnes is now nothing more than the sort of worm in the clay. Embodiment of a worm in the clay means mortality for all of us, the poem's speaker and its reader too, and my mouth full of dust till I cannot speak, Elizabeth concludes. For by late 1859, the hope that spiritualism held out to her of transcending the mortal body is itself dying. At the end of the summer, she sends Sophie a letter questioning some of the supernatural experiences that seemed especially staged by the younger woman. What is it that prompts Elizabeth to do so? Has the devil in some detail finally changed her mind, or is it just that way, away from her friend's charm and faced with the increasingly grim realities of trying to stay alive, she has at last sees things clearly? Whatever her reasons, just as when she finally relinquished her belief in her father, she now rips off her own blinkers. By this time, the reward of clarity is gathering gloom, and the Brownings settle for in their Roman winter and the turn of the decade, finding accommodation suddenly cheap due to the threat of impending war. Their relationship with the Eccles melts away to mere formality. Everything is becoming difficult now. In mid-January 1860, Elizabeth ventures on a rare outing. She and Robert go to Castellani, the jewelers, to see a fashionable exhibition of presentation swords for Napoleon III and Victor Emmanuel. One popular cause meets another. The Brownings are mobbed by autographs. Fun through this might have been in the past. Now it leaves Elizabeth coughing, breathless, and suffering an arrhythmic heartbeat for days. Still, she's managed to send Chapman and Hall, her poet, before Congress, and proofs to the new book arrive this month. Her title, advertising the collection, highly political content, comes from an abandoned Congress on Italian sovereignty that has been due to take place at this very time. In February, she composes a preface in which she implies that Britain, preoccupied with free trade, has failed properly to support Italian unification. Now, intervention of the affairs of neighboring states is a high political virtue, but not intervention does not mean passing by on the other side when your neighbors fall among thieves. Not surprisingly, when Congress appears to print in March, it brings down a storm of hostile reviews, most accusing Elizabeth of being unpatriotic. In the Anthemium, her old literary ally but political opponent, H.F. Corley, even misreads A Curse of a Nation and being distracted by perfidious Albion rather than American slavery, although he has a point since the poem is fierce in its injunctions but vague about what exactly it means by freedom and writing bond slaves. Reviews in Bell's Weekly, Messenger, The Examiner, The Critic, The Bookseller, The Atlas, The Daily News, The Press, The Spectator, The Saturday Review, and The Manchester Guardian are among those that follow, and Blackwood's verdict that women should not interfere with politics is typical. Elizabeth's profile ensures that very breadth of coverage that makes this criticism so insistent. She feels besieged and moves the fight to Robert's work, fuming to Sariana about the blindness, deafness, and stupidity of the English public to Robert, who she says is appreciated in Britain by only a small knot of pre-Raphaelite men. Through and in America, he's a power, a writer, a poet. He lives in the hearts of the people. It's a projection, but perhaps a healthy one, of the anger and of abandonment she must feel, and it helps that the staunchly intelligent and idiophile Anna Jameson, that good friend, dies the same month. Now the sense of political abandonment intensifies too. Tuscany has come under Victor Emmanuel's rule after a plebiscite on March 11th, but French liberation troops enter Savoy before the vote there has even been held. Elizabeth isn't well enough to join the crowd in the streets, who witnesses King Victor Emmanuel's entering Florence, April 1860, though she writes about it in her poem and its title As If She Were, or If She Were Reminded of that first triumphant process in 1847 below Casa Guidi's windows, and thousands of faces in wild exultation burn over the windows to feel him near. In May, Garibaldi gambles by invading Sicily with such small forces that he could have cost the country its slowly cohering political solution. The soil beneath my feet in Valor's act, forfeited, as Elizabeth writes to Garibaldi, through the gamble does pay off. Robert is working on persona poems again, but Italian political themes continue to dominate her own new work, which is still appearing regularly in Britain, Cornhill Magazine, and America the Independent. Elizabeth manages to engage 11-year-old Penn's emerging sensibilities in progressive realpolitik. She tells Henrietta that he cries when he read the political poems in Congress, but political stress is attritional. In June 1860, a fifth edition of Aurora Leigh appears without further revisions. On July 7th, the Brownings are once again installed in Villa Alberta Marciano, where by September, William Michael Rossetti, brother of their half-old friend Dante Gabriel, and Vernon Lushington, witnessed the threads drawn thin in their presence. Elizabeth's quarrels with Walter Savage Landor over Napoleon III, and Robert shows some slight symptom of approaching antagonism if Miss Browning, in talking, came to the outskirts of the spiritual theme. Apparently, Browning could express himself with some harshness to his wife when this subject was mooted. By November 7th, through when Garibaldi and Victor Emmanuel enter Naples together in triumph, Mrs. Browning has other worries. After the usual 6-week autumn in Casa Guidi, the household travels south for what is to be their final Roman winter. Arriving in November 23, they pick up vertiginous skinny house above the Spanish Steps at 126 Villa Felice. But while this is still happening, Elizabeth is somewhat removed and in a state of cruel suspense. Back in Somerset, Henrietta is dying slowly and agonizing of cancer. She's been gravely ill since the summer in the lovely old stone manor house at Stroke Court, Thurborough, where Surtees has finally been able to afford. Arabella may be the place marker who keeps the scattering family connected, but Henrietta is a sibling with whom, since Bro's death, Elizabeth has the most in common, especially once they both married. The dreaded new arrives on December 3rd. She died on the day Elizabeth and Robert arrived at home. It seems against the natural order of things that she should predecease the family invalid, and perhaps Elizabeth's profound grief is intensified by survivor's guilt. By dark coincidence, her poem of grief, written after Bro's death, De Profundis, appears in the Independent just 3 days later. Yet in 1861, draws her poems from Little Mattie to Nature Remorses, increasingly adopted their fictional, often persona form that will dominate her hugely successful last poems in the appears in 1862. This style is the pre-echo of Robert's Dramatis Personae, which will be published 2 years later, and it's he who will prepare the posthumous volume. Apparently followed a list drawn up in June 61. Widower's poets face a difficult choice between improving an uncompleted legacy of letting it go, perhaps overexposed into the world. A century from now, for example, conspiracy stories will surround Ted Hughes' attempts to do right for his late wife Sylvia Plath's work, though he chooses very clearly but good ones, as Plath's posthumous reputation attests. No similar cloud of suspicion will hang over Robert's head, even though the posthumous Elizabeth is much more in his own poetic image than she ever was alive. But suspicion without evidence is just gossip. Perhaps to remember how long Elizabeth has been writing in persona. Even 1826's An Essay on Mind included Raga Strong among its other poems. Now the living Elizabeth has a rare moment of cultural disconnect with Lord Walter's Wife, which Thackeray turns down to Cornhill Magazine in grounds of immodesty, usually so acutely turned into the zeitgeist. She has perhaps let herself get out of touch as she busies herself preparing Italian literals in her own poetry for Francesco dal Ungaro to turn into Italian verse. Elizabeth's heart is heavy, and Robert, not inclined to write this winter, as he tells Seriana, is once again toying with visual art, this time modeling clay in William Story's studio, yet the couple remains a magnet for writers and artists. In April, they talk with Joseph Severin, now British consul, about how he nursed the dying Keats 40 years ago, right here at the Spanish Steps. The late May, they got to go to the studio of Father Antonio Alessandri to be photographed. This is Elizabeth's second sitting. Last year, she posed with her and pen. Now Alessandri records a face drawn by illness, hair dyed jet black like a disguise. The same month that she also has a visit from Hans Christian Andersen. Her response is an homage, The North and the South, which she sends straight off to Thackeray for Cornhill. It's May 21st, 61, and this is the last poem she will write. On June 1st, as if by a kind of instinct, though ostensibly because of the weather, the Brownings break the pattern of recent years and leave for Casa Guidi, arriving home on June 5th. The very next day, Cavour, the great statesman who was to unite Italy, dies. Elizabeth is shocked and grief-stricken. Once again, her horrible vibrating body reacts. The death of her adored sister and of what seems to be any hope of democracy and independence for her much-loved adopted country bled into each other. It feels as if nothing can ever happen again. Grief is a kind of yearning, and Elizabeth yearns for the apartment towards the sights and sounds of her beloved Florence, an elegant yet so habitable city astride the river Arno that she has made her home, but which she has become too ill to go out to. Now even Casa Guidi has its ghosts, its old freedoms, and even her health was improving, and she went out and about with Robert, of happy days with Wilson, lit up by the blooming romances of Fernando, of Penn's infancy, of letters arriving from Henrietta, of those first civic parades. The unseasonably cool June means that even the apartment's tall windows let in less brightness than usual. On June 20th, Elizabeth, trapped in nostalgia and grief, has them opened and catches cold. 2 nights later, on June 25th, Robert is to call the doctor. Mr. Dr. Wilson diagnoses congestion and a possible abscess of the right lung. Although feverish with a racking cough and sore throat, Elizabeth is sure he's wrong. She feels just the same as all the other times when she's been ill, and besides, she can feel that it's her left lung that's troubling her as always. Whether or not it is the same as usual, she spends the next 5 days coughing and as a result, getting little sleep. She loses strength. Robert, too, passes these nights of coughing in a state of insomniac attention. It's as if they're keeping watch together to see whether the angel of death will pass over the house one more time. Suddenly, on the evening of June 28th, there's an injection of hopelessness. Isa Blagden calls with the news that the new prime minister, Baron Racasoli, shares Cavour's vision. Italy is going to be all right. It's a close call, but the news for the country is miraculously good. The angel of death seems to have passed over the city's roofs, and the entire peninsula leaved it untouched. And it means perhaps that there's no longer a battle for Elizabeth to brace herself against. Possibly she relaxes. At any rate, just after 3 in the morning of what is now June 29th, Robert notices that her feet have become cold. He arouses Annunziata and asks her to bring warm water and some jelly chicken, that soothing, sustaining food of invalids. He almost certainly administers some extra morphine too. Elizabeth is confused if she half wakes from a travel dream to exclaim, "What a fine steamer! How comfortable!" Annunziata bathes Elizabeth's feet in the warm water and feeds her some of the chicken. Robert sends the maid for some more water, and Elizabeth, with a trace of her old glitter, teases, "You are determined to make an exaggerated case of it." And she lets him take her in his arms. They rest like that together. Sometime after 4 a.m., Robert asks her if she knows him, and she reassures him, "My Robert, my heavens, my beloved. Our lives are held by God," she tells him. He lifts her, and she kisses him repeatedly. When he moves his face away, she kisses her hands towards him, says, "Beautiful, beautiful." A few moments later, she has stopped breathing. It is perhaps an ideal death, immensely moving and immensely intimate, and it is also and essentially the death of a lover. Elizabeth, raised on the doctrine of family love and prepared to lose everything for romantic love, has ended her life with love's avowal. according to her lover at least, but perhaps he isn't absolutely the most reliable narrator. Sometimes we believe that what should be true really was. Could this ideal deathbed be even slightly idealized? For Robert, the catastrophic loss of the person for whom his life is built runs a risk, like the loss of his mother in 1849, of destroying not just a way of life, but his own sense of self. He needs desperately to hold on to his foundation myth, the story of the twin poetic souls finding each other and building their own idyllic home together. Still, what he says about these last moments in his letters home rings true in many ways. At great moments, people do often become their most loving selves, since what will survive of us is love, and much more wholly true than Philip Larkin asserted in that famous poem, The Tiny Frail Elizabeth of 1861, her face drawn and crumpled by long illness, certainly seems physically ready to slip quickly away from life, and something else, the quiet unmooring of not the desperate struggle of the fatal asthma attack, and not the agonized drowning of inflected fluid of the burst abysses, and most resembles a breath shallowing, heart stopping morphine overdose, combined with high doses that result from Elizabeth's lifetime dependency on the drug, with a panicky human desire to relieve suffering. And this is not inconceivable. And who's to say it would not even be a kind of pragmatic, if unconscious, compassion? Love takes many forms, and of course, Elizabeth has had another great love besides Robert. 12-year-old Penn, still sporting the long curls and fancy clothes that has been his mother's whim. 3 years ago, Nathaniel Hawthorne found him slender, fragile, and spirit-like, as if he had little or nothing to do with human flesh and blood. Since then, a rather solitary childhood and the only offspring of parents whose migratory life means he's acquiring no close friends of his own age, and has given him an employment of solitary amusements, sketching and riding his pony. Wilson, in effect, his nanny, has been gone for a couple of years. Though sociable since birth, his reliance on his mother has been as great as any boy's. Where he is during this trance-like deathbed scene, what does he hear and overhear? What does he understand has happened? In the morning light, Isa Blagden returns to Casa Guidi to take Penn off to Villa Bricieri, her home nearby Bella Sagardo, an exclusive wooded hill district. In the next day, but July 1st, 1861, Penn is brought back to town with his mother's funeral. Elizabeth Barrett Browning is regarded as a heroine of Italian reunification, and all the shops near Casa Guidi have been closed in her honor. Indeed, the whole city, hung with the black of official mourning for Cavour, seems to be grieving for her, nor is this entirely an illusion. Next week, a prominent government minister, Simone Luigi Paragugi, will call at Casa Guidi to express the hopes of all Italians that Robert and Penn will remain in Tuscany. Within a couple of years, graceful Florence will erect a tablet on the house wall to memorialize Elizabeth, whose poems forged a gold ring between Italy and England. And today, her coffin, crowned with white blossoms and laurel wreaths, is carried on a special ceremonial route allowed only to public figures through the city of the Protestant cemetery. At the gravesite, Penn's father reads from his mother's poem, The Sleep, and friends, dear friends, when it shall be that this low breath is gone from me, and round my bier, yea, come to weep, let one most lovingly of you all say, nay, I terror must o'er her fall. He giveth his beloved sleep. That night he joins Penn at Isa Blagden's luxurious villa. Now changes happen in quick succession. In less than a week, by 5 July, the boy has shorn off his long hair in princeling style. Penn has the golden hairs and fantastic dress, is gone just as Ba is gone. Robert tells Sarania that is a common boy all at once, and that is practical, making it possible to do without an Azutia living, in which would be scandalous now that theirs is all male household, but it also draws a line under the life that Elizabeth led. Even Casa Guidi is to be abandoned. Robert commissions a photographer to create a record of the house's extraordinary way of life, but in the rooms darkened by the church walls of immediate opposites, the daguerreotype process doesn't take. So instead, the painter George Magnati is commissioned to enshrine the drawing room, just as Elizabeth disposed it and left it, and on August 1st, Robert and Penn leave for Florence, and it turns out for good. Penn has become a boy who can never go home. His immediate future holds a month in Paris, then 5 weeks with his father, Sansariana, and grandfather in Brittany. Perhaps one small comfort and continuity in this headlong transition that he allows to keep his little Giera mare, Stella, and all too soon Penn and his father and Stella are in London, and the boy is being enrolled with a tutor at the first stage of his year-long, ultimately unsuccessful struggle to cram him through an Oxford degree. By next May, his father will be settled at 19 Warwick Crescent, where he'll stay with the next quarter of a century as he manages the legacy of those 16 miraculous years of marriage, and his reputation grows and grows. Robert Browning will become an extraordinary poet and an avid traveler. Eventually, after 17 years, he will make return trips to Italy. Indeed, he will die there on December 12th, 1889, while visiting his son in the splendid Palazzo Ca' Rezzonico on the Grand Canal in Venice. For Penn, he will never outgrow his mother's joyous legacy. Italy and art are his destiny. After an uncertain start in childhood, he'll study fine art in Paris and Antwerp and become an accomplished, if never distinguished, professional sculptor and painter. His marriage to American heiress Fanny Coggington will do as much to enable his life in Italy as his father's active support will in establishing him as an artist. He will prove a devoted heir, assiduously collecting archival material and memorabilia of his parents' lives. He gives a home for life of his aunt Sariana, whom photographs reveal he closely resembles, and albeit at separate addresses, since their marriage fails, to his childhood intimates, Wilson and Fernando, and he will die intestate in 1912, and in his death, everything that this first and most loving witness of Elizabeth Barrett Browning's life has amassed will be auctioned off and dispersed. And Elizabeth herself, she has undergone the transformation from living, breathing woman, fluent, motivated, and sometimes self-absorbed, but always pushing herself onwards, fighting for breath, determined to stay alive and to speak, into a figure, into the stories other people tell about her. For her low breath is gone, and from the social matrix, she hasn't fallen. She hasn't fallen silent, far from it. On the next century and a half, her words will be read around the world. They continue to be heard today in the third decade of the 21st century, changed into the currency of which now becomes conventional political and social thought about slavery, child labor, rape, women's rights, and transformed again into the more than 20 centuries of women's writing that has appeared since her first book, The Battle of Marathon, was published. Societies around the world would doubtless have changed, and women emerged as writers and poets in increasing numbers, even if Elizabeth Barrett Browning has never lived. But these more recent writing women are the heirs nonetheless. When they write, the poets among them in particular would have been different without her. The whole direction of poetry in English would have changed. Flexible, tender, intimate, Elizabeth's poetic voice, as she asks yet again, "How do I love thee? Let me count the ways," comes back to us with a directness and seems startlingly modern, as if she's looking back over her shoulder at us, her wide central mouth dipping and rising in a curly bracket. That comes to the closing frame. Like Aurora Leigh, this biography is a portrait, not a self-portrait, but an imagination is greedy. As Elizabeth's readers, we respond to elements of her life we feel mirror our own. Something that especially speaks to me, for example, is seeing that John Milton, in his sonnet, "When I consider how my light is spent," calls that one talent, which is death, is squandered by family circumstances, ill health, shyness, casual intellectual misogyny. There is surely nothing wrong with such feelings. Let's call them recognition or complicity. It's how humans have always used stories and biographies in the first place. Stories, after all. Besides, how else can we encounter our biographical subject except by coming to meet her? Writing can never be wholly innocent of writing itself. Slowly, I'm coming to accept that the biographer's own self-awareness frames her subject, but Elizabeth poetry too composes a kind of self-portrait, or rather mirror. As she became herself through writing, she's writing reflected that developing self. And so her body of work creates a kind of looking glass in which dimly we make out the person she wrote it. Her choices and opinions, what moved her, habits and characteristics, turn a phrase. Through this is true of all writers' work. It's especially true for Elizabeth because poetry isn't, to phrase that early hero Byron, of her life a thing apart, but her whole existence. She makes a brilliant case study in writerly self innovation in the self on the page. Besides, this is a self that overwhelmingly repays our attention. Barrett Browning shows us that the way into good, even great writing goes step by step, gratis ad parnasium. You could say that her story works like a practice mirror for writers even today. 7 years after his wife's death, and his 4-volume verse novel, The Ring and the Book, Robert describes the literal mirror in which Elizabeth saw her only face daily, the one with twin cherubs and the tarnished frame which hung in the drawing room at Casa Guidi, tall to the ceiling top. Today it hangs there once again on the green wall above the red sofa, facing the windows, the balcony, and the side wall of San Felice, a shadowy view which it reflects only incompletely. Visitors to the apartment see their own reflections pass to and fro in the glass. Perhaps some even fantasize that they glimpse Elizabeth there too. If we don't need to visit Florence or to believe in ghosts to encounter her, to read Elizabeth Barrett Browning is to witness how, unaware that she's being observed, she reflects herself in her poetry, which, with all its innovative brilliance, makes a fabulous, ornate two-way mirror. That is the end of The Two-Way Mirror by Miss Sampson and the life of Elizabeth Barrett Browning and her family. Sorry for being emotional. This is a great read for me. Have a nice day.